Okay, I'm back one last time in this course with a video that I hope you will find helpful for Workshop 7, our final workshop. I created a problem that we can work on. This time in Chapter 7 we're working with files. And the files we're working with are those files that you see sometimes with the extension .txt, a text file, or sometimes an extension .dat, a data file. And in a text file or data file, their information is put into rows or with commas in between each item, and they can accumulate a lot of data. And to use the data, you have to open the file and read it. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about that when I go through the flowchart. So the problem I created was that Jesus Our Savior Church has two locations. One is in the city and one is in the suburbs. They each have a database file of members with a shared ID numbering system. You have been asked to create a file that merges the two database files into one file. You want to be sure the combined list of members does not have multiple entries of the same member ID number, and you want a count of how many members are at each location. So it has a shared ID numbering, so that when I'm a secretary at the city church, I have a block of ID numbers that I can use to sign up new members, and someone who is a member of the suburb church would have a block of ID numbers, and then they can have their file and the city church can have its file. What we want to do is merge them into one and have a list of all the members and account for how many are at the city church and how many are in the suburb church. Okay, so I depended heavily on a textbook to create this example because it's starting to get complicated now, and I really can't write this without depending a little bit on a textbook, and I think you'll see the same. Alright, so let us look at first the main line of the program, and I need to get over to declarations here. Okay, so we start by creating our declarations, and in it I have input files, the city file. I have an input file, the suburb file, and then I'm going to create an output file, which is the merged file. And then I'm going to have a number, which is the city ID number, a string, which is the city first name, a string, the city last name, and then go through that again for the street number and the street address, okay? The city street number and the city street name. Okay, then do the same thing for the suburb. I'll have a number for the suburb ID, the string for the first name, a string for the last name, and then a number for the street number, and a string for the suburb street name. And then I'm going to have an item called string are both at end. Are both at end, that is the string, are both at end, and I'm going to start it off by setting it equal to n, which means no, they're not both at the end. And we're talking about the two files, and you'll see that in a second. Alright, then I'm going to end it with number end underscore ID, a constant, which equals 6 nines, okay? Then a number, which will be the city count, I'm going to set that equal to 0 to start, and a number, which is the suburb count, I'm going to set equal to 0 to start. So the first module we're going to look at is the get ready. Okay, so let's get ready. I'll find that over here. It's right here. I'll come down to it. Okay, get ready. Open the city file. Okay, so now what we got to do is we're working with files. We've got to open them. Okay, so I have an action here to open the city file, which is called Jesus Our Savior Church, comma, city.txt. So I'm calling it a text file. It could be a .dat, a data file. Then I'm going to open the second file, which is the suburb file, Jesus Our Savior Church, comma, suburb, okay, .text. And then open the merge file. This is the one I'm going to create, so I have another file open. So you can picture this being like Word, okay? I can go into my directory and I can open a Word file and open a second Word file, and then I can open a blank one that has nothing on it and give it a name. So that's essentially what I did here. I have opened the merged file, Jesus Our Savior Church, .text. That is a new file that I've just created. It's open and has no content yet. Okay, so now I'm going to read the city file. Now when we say read the file, what we mean is take the contents of it and bring the contents of it onto our random access memory, our RAM on the computer. So it's nothing different than when I call up a Word file. When I call up a Word file from a directory, I am now looking at that file in my random access memory. The file itself is still available in the directory. So if I make changes to the file, the changes are being made on my random access memory, and when I close, it'll ask me, do you want to save it? And if I save it, it will take the file that's in the directory and change it to what I just created on the RAM. Okay, so that's similar to what we're doing here. We are reading the city file, we are reading the suburb file, which means we are bringing the contents of it into our random access memory. And then we're going to go to another module that's called check end. Okay, so let's go to the first module, which is read city. That is over here somewhere. Read city. Okay, what's going to happen, and we read the city file, so what's going to come in then is the city ID, the city first name, the city last name, the city street number, and the city name for the church known as the city. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is ask, is this the end of the file? If it is yes, then city ID will be equal to end ID. If it's not, then it will keep reading. And then we're saying return back to the get ready module. Alright, here's the second module. It does the same thing for the reading. We're going to read the suburb file now and put that information off the suburb file. Ask, is this the end of the file? If it is, then it'll be suburb ID will be end ID, and if not, then we'll keep reading. Okay, and then return. So we've returned to the get ready file. Okay, so it's going to go through once and do that for one data point. Okay, one set of data points. It's going to do that once. So that's why we created a loop later on, so that we can have it do it over and over and over again until we get all the way to the end. All right, now we got to the check end, so we're done with get ready, and now we're returning. Well, let's go see what happens after that. It is merge records. Okay, so now we're going to merge the records. So the first thing I do is come to this selection statement, and I say is city ID less than suburb ID? If the answer is yes, it is, then I want you to I want to ask the question, is the city ID less than the saved ID? And if I haven't saved an ID yet, then the answer is yes, it's less, and I output the city ID and so forth. So I'm now outputting this now into my merged file. It's being output. The city count is now equal to city count plus 1. So once I read that first record, I now have one member from the city church, so I'm counting. Okay, then I have saved ID is equal to city ID. So there is saved ID equals city ID, which means when I go around this loop again, that's what I'm going to be comparing the next city ID thing to. So I go back to the record, and I ask, is the city ID less than the suburb ID? So what I'm saying is I'm going to the second ID number now on the city file. If it is lower than the suburb ID on the suburb file, then I'll read the next city ID. So it could be the first two in a row are the two lowest ID numbers of both churches. If that's the case, then I'll move over here and I'll read, is the city ID less than the saved ID? This is how I'm preventing duplicating numbers. As long as the city ID isn't equal to the saved ID, then I'm going to keep going and adding that record and raising the count and then making saved ID equal to city ID. Okay, I'll keep going through that loop after I go back through that loop. Alright, and if the answer is no, that the city ID is not less than or greater than the saved ID, that means it's equal to it, which means it's a duplicate. So I will say no, and I'll come down here and I'll ask it to read city. I'll ask it to read the next one. Okay, I'm not going to output it twice. So when the city ID and the saved ID equal the same number, then I've got a double record. So I don't want that. So what happens is I skip over that, come down, and I say read city again. All right, and then check end, and then come back around again. So what I'm doing is I'm going through these two files. I'm opening these two files and I'm having them output one by one each ID and name and address and so forth associated with each ID for each church, starting with the lowest one at the first church, and then picking up a next one if it's lower at the other church, and going back and forth until I have gone through all of them. And now I have created a merged file. Okay, so after I've gone through the merge module, I go back to the finish module. So let me go back up here and look at what I'm doing through. Here's my main program line. Okay, and you know that check end, when you go to check end, and here we are repeating what was in the bottom of the get ready module, so that we can keep looking, keep it in the loop and keep looking. If we hadn't done this, we would have ended the program before we read all the files. Okay, so at the end of this is check end, the check end module. So we go up there to that check end module and check it out, and let me see if I can find that relatively quickly. There it is. There's check in right there. What it does is, is the city ID at end ID? In other words, have I finished all the items on the city ID? If the answer is yes, have I done it for the suburb ID? Have I read all the items on the suburb ID? And if the answer is yes to both of those questions, then I'm changing the value are both at end. It is now going to be equal to y, meaning yes. Okay, so when I go back to the main program loop, that was the question I was asking. When I have read both files, I'll have r both at end will be equal to y. Okay, as long as it is not equal to or less than or greater than y, I'm going to keep reading records. I'm going through the merge module and I'm going to keep reading records and outputting the lowest ID number that I see with both churches. Okay, once I have come to the point where I've reached the end of both files, they're both at an end, I finish up. So I go to the finish up module, which is somewhere around here. Here it is. There's finish up module. There it is. Output city members and city count. Okay. So so what I'm doing is I'm coming through and I'm reading them all, and I'm collecting all the ID numbers in order in the merge file, and then finally I output all the city members, and I also put the city count on there because I've been counting over here. Each time I pass through the loop, I'm counting. So I'll have a count for the suburb and I'll have a count for the city. I'll have all the members of the suburb all listed in order of ID number on my new file. So I will close the city file, and I will close the suburb file, and now I will close my merge file, and I will stop, and I have got the job done. Okay, took a long time to create this, takes a long time to think it through, and it just takes a matter of seconds to read it, depending on how much data there is. Okay, obviously comes in handy if you've got a lot of data files and you want to merge them together into one file. Okay, so that is how you're going to approach some of your problems in the homework today. So, like I said, I leaned heavily on the textbook on this one because some of this stuff is it's hard to memorize all this stuff, and so you have to use your textbook as a guide. So I hope I was helpful, and please let me know if you have any questions by coming to the forum or by emailing me. Okay, thank you.